What's the most horrific secret your child's model student classmate was hiding in plain sight? The phone call came at 2:15 p.m., a time of day when a call from your child's school is never, ever good news. I was in the middle of a budget meeting, surrounded by spreadsheets and the low hum of corporate nonsense, when my phone vibrated against the polished mahogany table. The caller ID read Oakwood Elementary. A cold knot of dread instantly formed in my stomach. Mr. Harrison? The voice on the other end was clipped, strained, and vibrating with an almost theatrical level of indignation. It was Miss Yit, my daughter Dilly's fifth-grade teacher. You need to come to the school immediately. Your daughter has been involved in a very serious incident. I tried to ask what happened, my mind racing through the typical schoolyard possibilities, a scraped knee, a shouting match. Maybe she'd talk back in class. But Miss Yit's next words vaporized those mundane fears and replaced them with something far colder. She split another student's head open, Mr. Harrison. She was throwing rocks at her. This is assault. The world went quiet. For a moment, all I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. Dilly? My Dilly? The quiet, bookish girl who spent her weekends drawing dragons and building elaborate Lego castles? The one who cried when she accidentally stepped on a snail? It was impossible. I mumbled something about being on my way and hung up, my hands shaking so badly I could barely end the call. The drive to the school was a 20-minute eternity filled with a toxic cocktail of disbelief, white-hot anger, and a creeping, gut-wrenching shame. I was furious at her for doing something so violent, so reckless. But a darker part of me was furious at myself. Where'd she learn this? What had I done or failed to do as a father to make her think that throwing rocks at another human being was an acceptable way to solve a problem? I pictured the principal's office, the stern faces, the inevitable lecture. I felt like a failure before I had even walked through the door. When I arrived, the scene was worse than I had imagined. Dilly was sitting ramrod straight in a hard plastic chair outside the principal's office. Her hands were caked with dirt. A dark, ugly smear of what I realized was blood stained the sleeve of her light blue school uniform. And her expression was unnervingly blank. She wasn't crying. She wasn't scared. She was just still, staring at a point on the wall across from her with a jaw set so tight I could see the muscles twitching. Miss, he was pacing in the hallway, practically radiating rage. The moment she saw me, she launched her attack. She attacked Veronica during recess. She hissed, her voice a weapon. There were multiple witnesses. She just picked up rocks and started throwing them. This isn't just misbehavior. It's a violent assault. The principal, a weary-looking man named Mr. Albright, beckoned me into his office. On his desk were a series of photos printed on glossy paper. They showed a girl, Veronica, with a nasty, bleeding gash on her forehead, her blonde hair matted with blood. The sight made me physically ill. We're suspending Dilly for 3 days, effective immediately, he said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. And frankly, we are strongly considering expulsion. This level of violence is unprecedented at our school. We have a zero-tolerance policy. I just stared at the photos, my mind struggling to connect the brutal injury with the quiet child sitting in the hallway. I walked back out and knelt in front of her, trying to keep my voice steady. Dilly, honey, what happened? Her eyes, usually so bright and full of life, were flat and exhausted. She finally looked at me, and her voice, when it came, was chillingly calm. I did it, she said, without a flicker of remorse. I threw the rocks. From behind me, Miss Yit let out a triumphant, ugly little smirk. Well, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. At least she's honest about her violent tendencies. That night was one of the longest of my life. The house was shrouded in a heavy, suffocating silence. Dilly just pushed her food around her plate at dinner, not eating a single bite. My wife and I exchanged helpless, worried glances over her head. After we cleared the table, I sat down next to her on the couch. Dilly, we need to talk about this, I began gently. She just shook her head, her gaze fixed on her hands in her lap. You threw rocks at a girl. You could have blinded her, Dilly. You could have killed her. This isn't you. Please, just help me understand what was so bad that this was your only answer. She finally looked up, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a deep, profound despair. You wouldn't believe me anyway, she muttered, her voice barely a whisper. Try me, I pleaded. She let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded alien coming from her. Nobody ever believes kids like me, she said, not when we tell the truth about perfect kids like Veronica. As if on cue, her phone, sitting on a coffee table, began to buzz incessantly. She picked it up and, with a resigned sigh, showed me the screen. A flood of texts from her classmates. "You're psycho. I'm gonna throw rocks at you next time I see you. I can't believe you did that to Veronica. She's the nicest person ever." Group chats were ablaze with rumors and vitriol, painting my daughter as a monster. But then I noticed something strange. Interspersed with all the hateful messages from the girls in her class were completely different ones. They were all from boys. "Thank you. You were so brave. We love you, Dilly." My confusion deepened. "Dilly, why are all the boys thanking you?" She snatched the phone back and tucked it away. "You wouldn't understand," she repeated, the wall around her building back up, thicker than ever. "Nobody ever does." The next 2 days of her suspension were a slow, agonizing form of torture. I tried every approach I could think of. I tried gentle, probing questions over pancakes. I tried firm, parent knows best lectures after dinner. I even managed to get the phone numbers of a few of the boys who had sent the supportive texts. Their parents were curt and evasive. "My son is just going through something," one mom said before quickly hanging up. The walls were closing in. Dilly was becoming more withdrawn, a ghost in her own home, and I was completely powerless to reach her. I tried again on the second night. "Dilly, whatever happened with Veronica, whatever she did, we can fix it. We can work through it together." She snapped, her voice cracking with a sudden, raw anger. Like how Missy had worked through it when I told her what was happening. And just as quickly as it appeared, the anger was gone, replaced by that same crushing silence. By the third night, I was at my breaking point. The school was abuzz. Her older brother had already gotten into 2 separate fistfights at his middle school, defending her honor against kids who were calling her a violent freak. A petition was circulating online, started by Veronica's mother, demanding Dilly's expulsion. The pressure was immense. I found her in her room, curled up on her bed, the glow of her phone screen illuminating silent tears rolling down her cheeks. I sat on the edge of her bed, the mattress dipping under my weight. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with desperation, "I cannot help you if you don't talk to me. I am on your side, always. But you have to let me in." She looked up at me then, and the exhaustion in her eyes was so profound it stole my breath. It was the look of a soldier who had been fighting a war all alone for far too long. "Dad," she said, her voice small and broken. "Do you really want to know? Because if I tell you, you can't untell me. You can't pretend it's not happening anymore." I took her small, cold hand in mine. "I promise," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "I will never ignore your problems. I will believe you." She took a deep, shuddering breath, and the story came tumbling out, a torrent of poison that had been building inside her for months. "Veronica, she's been cornering the second-grade boys," she began, her voice trembling. "She takes them into the equipment shed behind the playground. She makes them pull their pants down, and she takes pictures with her phone. She tells them if they ever tell anyone, she'll show the pictures to the whole school." A wave of nausea washed over me, so intense I thought I might be sick right there on her bedroom floor. "Did you tell someone?" I managed to choke out. "I told Missy it," she whispered, tears now flowing freely. "I told her 3 times. The first time, she said little boys make up stories about popular girls to get attention. The second time, she told me I was being disruptive. The third time, she threatened me with detention for spreading malicious rumors. She had gone to the principal, Mr. Albright, as well. He had patted her on the shoulder and told her that Veronica was a model student from a very good family, and that perhaps Dilly was just feeling a little bit jealous of her popularity. "I showed them, Dad," she sobbed. "I showed them Max crying after it happened to him. I showed them the bruises on Luke's arms from where he tried to fight her off. Nobody listened. They said girls don't do things like that." The abuse had been going on for 2 months. "Yesterday," she continued, her voice cracking, "I saw her dragging Ben's little brother behind the shed. He's only 6, Dad. 6. He was crying so hard, he couldn't even breathe. The image was so horrific, so vivid, that my vision tunneled. I yelled at her to stop," Dilly said, her voice hardening with the memory. "She just laughed at me. She said no one would ever believe a weirdo like me over her. So, I picked up rocks." She showed me her phone again. This time, I saw what she hadn't shown me before. It wasn't just texts. It was screenshots of desperate, pleading messages from the older siblings of the younger victims. Reports they had filed with the school that had been marked unfounded and dismissed. There was even a short, grainy video clip of Veronica grabbing a smaller boy by the arm and pulling him toward the shed, a clip the administration had deemed unclear and inconclusive. "I tried everything else first, Dad," Dilly whispered, her whole body shaking with the force of her sobs. "I tried everything." In that moment, something inside me broke. The confusion, the shame, the anger of my daughter. It all evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline rage unlike anything I had ever felt in my life. This wasn't just a failure of one teacher or one principal. This was a systemic rot, a complete and utter abdication of the most fundamental duty of any school, to protect its children. I went nuclear. The next morning, I was on the phone with the police department. I didn't care about the school's internal processes anymore. This was a criminal matter. When the police detectives, a man and a woman who looked like they'd seen it all, interviewed the young boys separately, away from the intimidating presence of any school staff, the dam broke. 5 different boys, ages 6 to 8, broke down and, through tears, confirmed every single horrific detail of Dilly's story. They found the pictures on Veronica's phone, hidden in a locked folder. Missy was fired on the spot. Criminal charges were filed against Veronica. The school district went into full damage control mode, issuing statements about their commitment to student safety. For a few weeks, it felt like we had won. The righteous had triumphed. But the victory was sickeningly short-lived. 3 weeks later, Dilly came home from school. Her suspension had been expunged, with her face tear-stained and swollen. She threw her backpack on the floor and ran to her room, slamming the door. When I finally got her to open it, she collapsed into my arms. "You promised," she cried, pounding her small fist against my chest. "You promised you would help. You said it was over. Honey, what is it? What happened?" "She's back," she sobbed. "Veronica is back at school." My blood, which had been simmering with rage for weeks, instantly boiled. It turned out that Veronica's father, a wealthy real estate developer, had made a quiet, unsolicited donation of $17,000 to the school's technology fund. And just like that, with the stroke of a pen on a check, his daughter was back in the hallways. A predator returned to her hunting ground, more untouchable than ever. I looked at my daughter's devastated face, her eyes red and puffy, and I felt my teeth grind together with such force I thought they might crack. This was not over. This was not something a donation could fix. I wasn't going to let them bury this. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking as I scrolled through my recent calls to find the number for Detective Schroeder, the lead investigator on the case. It went straight to his voicemail. "Detective, this is David Harrison, Dilly's father," I said, my voice tight and strained. "It's about the Veronica case at Oakwood Elementary. She's back in school. Her father wrote a check, and they just let her back in. My daughter is having panic attacks. She won't even leave her room." I left a rambling, desperate message, pleading with him to call me back. An hour later, he did. He sounded as tired and frustrated as I felt. "Look, Mr. Harrison, I know this looks terrible," he explained, "but juvenile cases are incredibly complex. The donation is suspicious, yes, but not technically illegal. The court system is designed for rehabilitation, not punishment, especially for minors." He told me that a family with that kind of money could hire lawyers who would tie this up for years, and the likely outcome would be court-mandated therapy, not expulsion. It felt like punching a concrete wall. That night, after Dilly had finally cried herself to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my wife, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating our grim faces. I had pulled up the contact information for every single member of the school board. I started typing, my fingers flying across the keyboard, pouring all of my rage into a scathing email. My wife read over my shoulder. "Maybe," she suggested gently, "you should take out the part where you call them morally bankrupt, corrupt cowards who are complicit in child abuse." We spent the next 2 hours rewriting the emails, stripping out the raw emotion and replacing it with cold, hard facts, citing dates, names, and police report numbers. The next morning, Dilly refused to get out of bed, insisting her stomach hurt too much to go to school. I didn't have the heart to force her. I called my boss and told him I had a family emergency. Then I called the school and demanded an immediate meeting with Principal Albright. His secretary tried to put me off, but I refused to take no for an answer. At 2 p.m., I walked into his office and dropped a stack of papers an inch thick on his desk with a satisfying thud. Every police report, every witness statement. "We have to follow due process, Mr. Harrison," he stammered, his eyes darting everywhere but at me. "Every student deserves a second chance. What about the second chances for the kids she victimized?" I shot back. "The ones who are still having nightmares." He mumbled something about a safety plan and supervised recess. When I pressed for specifics, he couldn't provide any. I left his office feeling more hopeless than ever. On the drive home, a friend who worked as a paralegal gave me a name, Audrey Armstrong. "She's a shark," he said. "Specializes in education law. specifically protecting kids from negligent school districts. I called her immediately. She listened to the entire story without interruption, and when I was done, there was a long pause on the line. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The school has violated at least 4 state education codes and 2 federal statutes. Can you be in my office at 3:30? That meeting was the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in weeks. Audrey was a force of nature, small and sharp, with eyes that missed nothing. She laid out a strategy: formal complaints to the State Department of Education and the Federal Office for Civil Rights, public records requests for all communications between the school and Veronica's family. We left her office armed with a plan and a renewed sense of purpose. But the school wasn't done fighting back. That night, Principal Albright called again. My son had gotten into another fight. He'd punched a kid who called Dilly a snitch. "One more incident," Albright warned, "and he'll be suspended too." At the dinner table, my son sat with his arms crossed, refusing to eat. "They were saying horrible things about Dilly," he mumbled. "Someone had to do something." I looked at my family. My daughter, traumatized and betrayed. My son, lashing out to protect his sister. My wife, quietly and steadfastly supporting us all. We were exhausted, frayed, and under attack from all sides. But we were not broken. Tomorrow, I would call Audrey. Tomorrow, I would attend the next school board meeting. Tomorrow, we would keep fighting, because that's what you do when the world punishes your child for being a hero. You become the villain they need you to be. You fight back until they listen. The fight consumed our lives. I began documenting everything. Every harassing text Dilly received, every taunt her brother endured on the bus, every dismissive email from the school. Audrey told us this mountain of evidence was our greatest weapon. We started a support group with other families whose children had been victimized by Veronica. We met in secret at our house every Saturday, a small band of terrified but determined parents. One mother's husband worked for Veronica's dad. She was terrified of losing their income, but provided us with crucial inside information. Another dad had photos of bruises on his son that the school nurse had dismissed as playground bumps. Together, we were building a case the district couldn't ignore. The harassment escalated. Anonymous social media accounts popped up, posting cruel memes about Dilly, calling her a liar and a psycho. I had to start driving the kids to and from school myself after my son came home with gum spit in his hair for the 3rd time. My work performance plummeted. My boss was sympathetic, but patience has its limits. I knew my job was on the line. But then a breakthrough. A woman named Allison Hutchinson from the district's compliance department called me. She had received our formal complaints and was launching an official investigation. Her tone was different. She was professional, meticulous, and she listened. She interviewed each of our families, and I could tell from her line of questioning that she was finding the same pattern of negligence and cover-ups that we had. During one of our meetings, she accidentally left a folder open on her desk. I saw emails between Principal Albright and Veronica's father, with dollar amounts highlighted, dated just before Veronica was readmitted. Allison quickly closed the folder, but not before she gave me a look that said, "I'm on your side." Meanwhile, Dilly started seeing a therapist, Dr. Pritchard, a woman who specialized in what she called institutional betrayal. It was the perfect term for what Dilly had experienced. The therapy was slow, difficult work, but for the first time in months, I saw glimpses of my old daughter returning. She started drawing again. She ate dinner without being prompted. The dark circles under her eyes began to fade. At the next school board meeting, I signed up for the public comment period. I stood at the podium, my hands shaking, and I read a prepared statement. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I just laid out the facts, the timeline, the evidence. I spoke about how a $17,000 donation seemed to be worth more than the safety and well-being of 5 small children. Most of the board members stared at their phones, but 2 of them looked me in the eye. 2 was enough. The day after the meeting, a journalist from the local paper, Orion Castillo, contacted me. He'd been investigating the district for months, looking into a pattern of big-money donors whose children seemed to operate above the rules. We met, and I gave him everything on the condition that he protect the identities of all the children involved. 2 days after that, Veronica's family sent us a cease and desist letter, threatening to sue us for defamation. Audrey just laughed when she read it. "This is a scare tactic," she said. "It means we're winning." The pressure was building on all fronts. Parents started showing up at the school during pickup, surrounding administrators and demanding answers. The local news picked up Orion's story. The district's carefully constructed wall of denial was beginning to crumble. The school board called an emergency session. They voted to reassign Principal Albright to an administrative desk job pending a full investigation. They announced that Veronica would be placed on home instruction with a private tutor and would not be allowed on school property. Detective Schroeder called with news that the prosecutor was refiling charges, armed with the new evidence of multiple victims and the school's pattern of obstruction. It wasn't a total victory, but it was a start. The tide was turning. The final weeks of school were a blur of small victories that, together, felt like a monumental shift. The district, facing multiple lawsuits and a PR nightmare, agreed to mediation. We sat across a long table from their lawyers and administrators. They offered to expunge Dilly's suspension. We demanded more. We demanded new, transparent reporting systems for abuse, mandatory training for all staff, and independent oversight. After hours of negotiation, we had an agreement. A few days later, a realtor friend texted me. Veronica's house was on the market, priced for a quick sale. The family was leaving town. The former teacher, Miss Yet, had her teaching license suspended pending a state review. The school counselor who had dismissed Dilly's concerns showed up on our doorstep one evening with a formal letter confirming Dilly's record was completely clear. She stood on the porch, wringing her hands, and stammered out an apology for not listening. Dilly, who had been standing behind me, just gave a small, quiet nod and went back inside. There was no grand, cinematic moment of triumph. There was just a slow, quiet return to something resembling normal. Dilly started going to her art club again. Her brother's wrestling team won their divisional championship. He dedicated his final match to his sister, the toughest fighter I know. The other parents, the ones who had called for my daughter's expulsion, started approaching me at the grocery store, quietly apologizing for not believing us. We used some of the money from a settlement with the district to pay for the kids' summer camps. Art camp for Dilly, wrestling camp for her brother. We watched them spread brochures on the kitchen table, their faces bright with excitement, and my wife and I exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated relief. The cloud had lifted. The night before the first day of school in the fall, we drove past Oakwood Elementary. There were new signs everywhere outlining the new abuse reporting procedures. Brightly vested playground monitors were already walking the grounds. There was a giant padlock on the equipment shed. The next morning, Dilly put on her backpack and walked through those front doors with her head held high. And I walked back to my car, not as a failure, but as the proud father of a hero. A hero who, when every adult in her life failed her, had the courage to pick up rocks and fight for what was right.